How did a 400-year-old empire vanish in just 10 weeks?
In 1898, the Spanish Empire was no longer the unstoppable force it once had been. For more than 4 centuries, Spain had ruled vast parts of the world, from the Americas to Asia. However, by the end of the 19th century, it was struggling to hold on to its last few colonies. Across the Atlantic, the United States was growing at an incredible speed. It was an industrial giant looking for a moment to prove its power on the global stage. Then, a single explosion in a harbor changed everything. But the real tragedy of this story wasn't just the war itself. It was the decision by Spain's leaders to fight a battle they knew they couldn't win, simply because they were too afraid to admit their empire was over. Cuba was the most valuable piece of what remained of Spain's empire, and the Cuban people were fighting a brutal war for independence. To crush the rebellion, Spain sent General Valeriano Weyler, who started a policy that would shock the world. He forced hundreds of thousands of civilians into concentration camps to stop them from helping the rebels. These camps were filled with disease and hunger, and thousands died. In the United States, newspapers owned by powerful men like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer saw an opportunity. They ran sensational and often exaggerated stories about the suffering in Cuba. This was the birth of yellow journalism, and it fueled a massive wave of anger across America. To protect American citizens and business interests during the chaos, the U.S. government sent the battleship USS Maine to Havana Harbor. On February 15, 1898, a massive explosion tore through the USS Maine while it was anchored in the harbor. The blast killed more than 260 American sailors and destroyed the ship instantly. Although modern historians now believe the explosion was likely an accident caused by a coal fire inside the ship, the American public didn't wait for an investigation. They immediately blamed Spain. The slogan, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," was everywhere. Washington gave Spain an ultimatum. They had to give Cuba its independence immediately or face a full-scale war. Spain was suddenly trapped between a humiliating peace and a fight they weren't ready for. This leads us to the fatal decision. Spain's leaders in Madrid were not delusional. They looked at their navy and saw outdated ships, many made with old metal and even wood. They looked at their economy and saw it was in ruins. They knew that a direct conflict with the modern steel-plated American fleet would be a slaughter. However, the government was terrified of its own people. They feared that if they surrendered Cuba without a single shot being fired, the Spanish public would revolt and overthrow the monarchy. They chose honor over the lives of their men. Instead of negotiating a diplomatic withdrawal, they decided that losing a war was better for their political survival than admitting they were no longer a superpower. They chose to send their sailors to die just to avoid a political crisis at home. The war lasted only 10 weeks, and it was one of the most one-sided conflicts in history. In the Philippines, at the Battle of Manila Bay, the American fleet attacked the Spanish ships at dawn. By noon, every single Spanish ship was at the bottom of the ocean, while not a single American sailor was killed in the fight. A few months later, the exact same thing happened at the Battle of Santiago de Cuba. The Spanish sailors fought with incredible bravery, but they were using old guns against modern steel warships with superior range. It wasn't a battle. It was target practice for the Americans. The Spanish Navy, which had once ruled the Atlantic and Pacific for centuries, was wiped out in just a few hours of fighting. By July 1898, Spain had no cards left to play. In the Treaty of Paris, they were forced to sign away everything. They gave up Cuba and handed over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. In exchange for a payment of $20 million, the remnants of a 400-year-old empire were handed over to a new master. It was one of the fastest collapses of a global power in human history. For Spain, this wasn't just a military loss. It led to a massive national identity crisis known as the Generation of '98, where the country had to face the fact that its days of glory were gone forever. Meanwhile, the United States emerged as a true world power with influence across two oceans. The Spanish-American War is a chilling reminder of how pride and political fear can distort leadership. Spain's government risked thousands of lives and its entire global standing just to avoid looking weak in front of their own people. They believed that losing a war was more honorable than choosing a diplomatic settlement. In the end, that fatal decision didn't save the monarchy or the government's pride. It only accelerated the death of the Spanish Empire. It reshaped the balance of power for the 20th century and proved that in a changing world, clinging to the past is the most dangerous decision a leader can make. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's darkest strategic failures, make sure to subscribe to History's Fatal Decisions. We have more stories of empires, errors, commercial disasters, and the human cost of bad leadership coming soon.